I remember that day clearly. It was a sunny Tuesday when I was about to meet Mark's parents for the first time. I was nervous but excited. Mark and I had been dating for 2 years, and he had finally popped the question. I had heard a lot about his parents, but we'd never met. Mark had always described his parents as traditional and a bit old-fashioned. I guess I didn't realize what that meant until I met them. We decided to meet at a local cafe. I arrived first, wearing my favorite blue dress, hoping to make a good impression. Mark arrived with his parents. His mom, Mrs. Thompson, wore a stern look and his dad, Mr. Thompson, seemed uninterested in everything around him. "Kate, these are my parents, John and Margaret Thompson," Mark introduced us. "Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," I said with a smile. "Likewise," Mrs. Thompson replied, scanning me from head to toe. "Mark tells us you're a lawyer. Where do you work?" I was taken aback by her directness but managed to reply, "At Johnson and Partners, downtown." "And your salary? Must be good, being a lawyer and all," Mr. Thompson chimed in, his tone blunt. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's adequate for my needs," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "And where do you plan to live after the wedding?" I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd step in, but he just shrugged. "We're still discussing that," I said. "And your parents, what do they do?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice almost demanding. "They run a small business," I replied, growing uncomfortable with the interrogation. Mrs. Thompson snorted. "Small business, huh? Let's hope they can contribute decently to the wedding." I felt a knot in my stomach. Mark noticed my discomfort but said nothing. As we ordered, Mrs. Thompson kept making side comments about the prices, and Mr. Thompson kept nodding in agreement. The whole meeting felt more like a business transaction than a family gathering. I remember thinking, is this what my future looks like? I tried to shrug off the feeling, telling myself it was just first meeting jitters. But deep down, I knew this was a red flag I couldn't ignore. It didn't take long after that first meeting for Mark's parents to become a constant, unsettling presence in my life. Their calls would come at any hour, disrupting my daily routine. Each ring of the phone started to feel like an intrusion. One evening, just as I was about to leave my office, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Thompson. "Kate, dear, I need you to look over some legal papers for us." "It's just a small favor," she said, her voice laced with expectation. I sighed, feeling the weight of her request. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm actually just heading out from work. Can it wait?" "Oh, it's just a quick look." "You can do it, can't you? For family," she pressed. I agreed reluctantly, knowing this was becoming a pattern. The next day, Mr. Thompson called. "Kate, I need help with setting up a new TV. Mark's busy, can you swing by?" Their requests were becoming more frequent and more demanding. I tried talking to Mark about it. "Mark, your parents are calling me all the time. For legal advice, for tech support, for everything," I said, hoping he'd understand. "They're just being friendly, Kate." "They're like that with everyone," Mark replied casually, brushing off my concerns. "But it's too much. They're calling me at work, at odd hours." "I'm feeling overwhelmed," I insisted. "Come on, Kate. They're harmless." "Just trying to bond with you," he said, not meeting my eyes. I felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. It was as if Mark was completely blind to his parents' overbearing behavior. One evening, as we were having dinner at my place, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, again. "Kate, can you come over tomorrow? I need some advice on redecorating the living room." "You have such good taste," she said. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm not really an interior designer." I started, but she cut me off. "But you have such a lovely home. I insist." "We'll have lunch," she said, making it sound more like a command than a request. I hung up, feeling trapped. Mark just shrugged and said, "See? They really like you." But to me, it felt more like they were taking advantage of me, and Mark's indifference was only making it worse. I started to wonder if this was what my future with Mark would be like, constantly being at the beck and call of his parents, with no support from him. It was a Friday evening when Mark suggested we go out for dinner with his parents. He chose a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind where you'd think twice before checking the prices on the menu. I had a hunch it wouldn't be a casual, relaxing dinner, and boy, was I right. We arrived at the restaurant, and the Thompsons were already there, scanning the menu. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up when she saw the lobster and steak options. "Kate, you simply must try the lobster here. It's divine!" Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. I glanced at the menu and saw the price. It was more than I wanted to spend, but before I could respond, Mr. Thompson chimed in. "Mark told us you're doing well at your firm. Surely, a successful lawyer like you can afford a little splurge now and then," he said, his tone a bit too pointed. Feeling cornered, I smiled weakly and said, "Actually, I was thinking of something lighter, maybe a salad." Mrs. Thompson looked at me as if I had suggested something outrageous. "A salad? Nonsense, you're at one of the best restaurants in town. You must try their specialties." I felt uncomfortable, but decided not to argue. I didn't want to cause a scene. As we were eating, the conversation revolved around Mark and his achievements, with his parents occasionally throwing in a question or two about my work, but not really listening to my answers. Then came the moment of truth, the bill. Mr. Thompson patted his pockets and then looked at his wife with a feigned expression of surprise. "Oh dear, I think I left my wallet at home," he said, his voice a little too calm for someone who'd just dined lavishly on someone else's dime. Mrs. Thompson joined in the charade. "John, how could you be so forgetful? I don't have mine either." I looked at Mark, expecting him to step in, but he just shrugged and mumbled, "I guess I forgot my card too." I couldn't believe it. Were they serious? It was clear this wasn't just forgetfulness. It felt more like a setup. With a sinking feeling, I pulled out my card and handed it to the waiter. Mrs. Thompson smiled sweetly at me. "Thank you, dear. You're such a lifesaver." As we left the restaurant, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Was I just a walking wallet to them? And why didn't Mark say anything? With the wedding drawing nearer, it became increasingly clear that it was time for our parents to meet. Given all my experiences with Mark's parents, I was bracing myself for this encounter. I remember pacing in my living room, phone in hand, rehearsing how I'd break the news to my parents. I finally mustered the courage and called them. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I think it's time you met Mark's parents," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Kate, we've been so excited about this. When can we meet them?" Mom's voice was a mix of enthusiasm and curiosity. I took a deep breath before adding a cautious note. "Just to give you a heads up, they're a bit, well, intense." Dad's voice came through with a chuckle. "Kate, we've seen all sorts in our days. Don't you worry, we'll manage." His confidence was comforting, but I couldn't shake off my apprehensions. We decided the Grandview Hotel, known for its pleasant ambience and beautiful surroundings. It was a familiar place to me, which I hoped would provide a distraction if things got too intense. The next day, I mentioned the plan to Mark over breakfast. "So, we're meeting at the Grandview Hotel this Saturday. I think it'll be nice for our parents to meet in a neutral, relaxed setting." Mark nodded, absorbed in his phone. "Sure, sounds good. I'll let my folks know." I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of preparation. I wanted to ensure that everything was perfect, hoping it would help keep the peace. As the day grew closer, my nerves began to fray. I found myself obsessing over every little detail, from what I would wear to how I would steer the conversation away from any potentially sensitive topics. On the eve of the meeting, I lay awake, scenarios running through my head. What if Mark's parents said something offensive? What if my parents didn't like them? What if the whole lunch turned into a disaster? The morning of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I chose a simple but elegant dress, hoping to strike the right balance between casual and formal. Mark, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed by the significance of the day. "It's just lunch, Kate. Everything will be fine," he said nonchalantly as he got dressed. His calmness did little to soothe my anxiety. If anything, it made me feel more alone in my concerns. I wondered if he truly understood how his parents' behavior had been affecting me, or if he was just choosing to ignore it. As we drove to the hotel, I went over the plan in my head. Keep the conversation light, avoid controversial topics, and try to ensure everyone gets along. Simple, right? The Grandview Hotel looked stunning as always, its elegant facade basking in the afternoon sun. As Mark and I walked into the lobby, my stomach was doing somersaults. I spotted my parents first, sitting in the lounge area. They stood up as we approached, smiles on their faces. "Kate, dear, you look wonderful," my mom said, giving me a reassuring hug. Dad gave me a firm, supportive pat on the back. Mark's parents arrived shortly after. The air seemed to change as soon as they walked in. Mrs. Thompson's eyes scanned the lobby like she was assessing the value of every item. "Nice place you've chosen, Kate," Mr. Thompson commented dryly, as he shook hands with my parents. "We thought it'd be a lovely spot for everyone to get together," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. We moved to the dining area, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. A hotel employee approached us with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry, but we're a bit overbooked today. We only have a few single rooms and 2 triple rooms available," he explained. "One of the triple rooms is our finest suite, with all amenities. The other is more basic and close to the road, so it can be a bit noisy," he added. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Thompson jumped in. "Well, obviously, John, Mark, and I will take the suite. Kate, you can cover the cost, right? After all, you organized this meeting." I was taken aback by her audacity. Well, I was thinking my parents and I could take the suite, and... But Mrs. Thompson cut me off. "Nonsense. We're the guests. And besides, you're the one with the big lawyer salary." My dad, trying to defuse the situation, suggested, "Why don't we discuss this over lunch and decide afterward?" Lunch was a tense affair. Conversation was forced, and I noticed Mark's parents sizing up my folks, their comments edged with subtle digs. My parents, to their credit, kept their cool, responding with grace and humor. As we neared the end of the meal, the room topic resurfaced. Mrs. Thompson was adamant. "We should get the suite. It's only proper. Kate can afford it." Mark, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Mom's right. It's important they're comfortable." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he really siding with them over this? My mom, ever the peacemaker, suggested, "Why don't we let the hotel decide? They can assign rooms based on availability." But Mrs. Thompson wouldn't have it. "Kate said you have a small business. I think you're not used to luxury. The simplest room should suit you. It is just designed for people with small incomes." The tension was palpable. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about rooms, it was about respect, something Mark's parents seemed to have little of, especially for me and my family. As the tension in the hotel lobby mounted, my father, George, cleared his throat and stepped forward, commanding everyone's attention. "There's something you all should know," he said, his voice calm and assertive. Mark, his parents, and I all looked at him, curious and a bit confused. "This hotel," Dad continued, along with several others across the country, "belongs to our family business." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mrs. Thompson's mouth dropped open, and Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in shock. Mark turned to me, his face a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You own this hotel?" Mrs. Thompson finally managed to sputter out. "Yes, and a few more," Dad replied casually. We've always preferred to keep a low profile. The hotel employee, recognizing my father, suddenly seemed very flustered. Mr. Williams, I apologize for the inconvenience earlier. I had no idea. Dad dismissed his concerns with a wave. It's fine. But we will be taking the suite, and Mark's family can have the other room. And there's no need for Kate to pay. Suddenly, Mrs. Thompson's demeanor shifted dramatically. She became excessively flattering, her tone oozing with a newfound affection. George, Linda, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea. You must be so proud of your accomplishments. Mark, who had been silent until now, turned to me, an eager look in his eyes. Kate, this is incredible. We should move up our wedding date, don't you think? I looked around at their changed faces, the forced smiles, the sycophantic attitudes. It was all too much, too fake. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. Actually, Mark, there won't be a wedding. I'm calling off the engagement. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered, Mr. Thompson looked stunned, and Mark was speechless. I can't be a part of a family that only values people for their wealth and status, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the pretense, the expectations, and a future that no longer felt right for me. As I walked away from the hotel, my heart pounding and my mind racing, I heard Mark's footsteps hurrying after me. Kate, wait, please. Let's talk about this, he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. I stopped and turned to face him, feeling a surge of determination. What is there to talk about, Mark? Your parents' behavior? Your indifference? Before Mark could reply, Mrs. Thompson stormed up to us, her face red with anger. Ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you, she spat out, her words laced with venom. I stared at her in disbelief. Done for me? You've done nothing but disrespect me and my family. Mrs. Thompson's tirade continued, her words becoming more hurtful. Stupid girl. You and your parents think you're better than us, don't you? Mark looked torn between us, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. It was then that my father, George, stepped in. His voice was calm but carried an authority that stopped Mrs. Thompson in her tracks. I think it's time for you to leave our hotel, he said firmly. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. We're not going anywhere. You can't make us. Dad turned to the hotel staff. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Thompson out. They are no longer welcome here. The staff moved in, politely but firmly guiding Mark's parents away. Mrs. Thompson was still hurling insults over her shoulder as they left. Mark looked at me, a mix of confusion and regret in his eyes. Kate, I'm sorry, I didn't expect. But I cut him off. It's too late for sorry, Mark. Your silence said everything I needed to know. With those final words, I walked away from him, the sound of his mother's angry voice fading into the background. I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. It hurt to end things with Mark, but I knew it was the right decision. As I drove home, the weight of the day's events began to sink in. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. A chapter where I stood up for myself and refused to settle for anything less than what I deserved. The days following the breakup were a whirlwind of emotions. I oscillated between relief, sadness, and a newfound sense of freedom. The decision to end my engagement with Mark, though painful, felt like the first step towards a future where I respected my own worth. One evening, as I sat on my porch, my mom called. Kate, how are you holding up, sweetheart? Her voice was full of concern. I took a deep breath, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I'm doing okay, Mom. It's been hard, but I feel like it was the right decision. You're stronger than you realize, Kate. And we're so proud of you, she said warmly. I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for my supportive family. Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you and Dad. There was a brief pause before she spoke again. You know, sometimes the end of one thing is just the start of something new. Something better. Her words struck a chord in me. You're right, Mom. This is a chance for a new beginning. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work and spent time with friends who had been my pillars of strength. Their support was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. One weekend, while having lunch with my best friend, Sarah, she said, "You know, Kate, I think you did something many wouldn't have the courage to do. You stood up for yourself." I nodded, stirring my coffee. It was tough, but I realized I have to be true to myself. I can't be in a relationship where I'm not valued. Sarah smiled, raising her glass. To new beginnings and self-respect. May this be the start of something wonderful for you. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a sense of optimism about the future. In the weeks that followed, I found a new sense of independence. I explored hobbies I'd put on the back burner and even started planning a solo trip, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. Life after Mark was different, but it was empowering. I realized that being on my own wasn't something to fear, but an opportunity to discover myself and what I truly wanted in life. As I packed my bags for the trip, I felt a thrill of excitement. This was my journey, my path to discovering who I was outside of a relationship. I was moving forward, not with bitterness, but with hope and an open heart, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.
Did you really think you could just move your parents into our home without asking me, Ryan? I asked, my voice quivering with a mix of anger and disbelief. Ryan, my husband of 6 years, looked up from his laptop with a smirk that I had grown to despise. Oh, Amelia, don't be so dramatic. It's just for a while, and besides, it's not like you have a say in this. His words felt like a slap in the face. The house, a charming 2-story nestled in a quiet suburb, wasn't just any house. It was the home my grandparents had left me, the place where I'd planned to raise our son, Lucas, away from the toxicity of Ryan's family. You do remember that this house is in my name, right? I retorted, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Ryan's expression faltered, his smugness giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. As our 2-year-old Lucas toddled into the room, I forced a smile for his sake. He was blissfully unaware of the tension, his chubby hands reaching up towards me. Scooping him into my arms, I kissed his forehead, trying to calm the storm inside me. I'm not okay with this, Ryan. Your parents, they've never respected me or our space. Why now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Ryan shrugged, his indifference stoking my frustration. They're family, Amelia. You wouldn't understand. Family. The word echoed in my mind mockingly. My own family, who ran a small but beloved coffee shop in town, had always been my sanctuary. They were nothing like Ryan's controlling, overbearing parents. The doorbell rang, interrupting our standoff. Through the peephole, I saw them. Ryan's parents, suitcases in tow, ready to invade our life. My heart sank. Fine, Ryan, let them in. But this isn't over, I hissed, handing Lucas to him before opening the door. Amelia, darling, cooed Ryan's mother, sweeping past me without a second glance. His father followed, a stern man who'd barely acknowledged me since our wedding day. As they settled in, making themselves comfortable in my living room, I felt a sense of intrusion that was all too familiar. This was just the beginning, I realized. But as I watched them, something within me shifted. I was done being the compliant daughter-in-law, bending to their whims. I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I was ready to fight for it. The following days turned into a blur of unwelcome changes. Ryan's mother, Elaine, had a way of making her presence known in the most suffocating manner. She rearranged my kitchen, criticized my parenting, and treated our home as if it were her own. Lucas shouldn't be eating that, Amelia. It's not healthy, Elaine chided one morning as I prepared Lucas's breakfast. I bit back a sharp retort, feeling the familiar sting of her judgment. He's fine, Elaine. It's just cereal. She'd skeed, shaking her head. In our house, we believe in a proper diet. You really should learn. Her comments were like needles, each one pricking at my patience. Ryan, as usual, was of no help, buried in his work and oblivious to the growing tension. One evening, as I put Lucas to bed, Elaine barged into his room. He's still not sleeping through the night? You must be doing something wrong." Her words were a slap in the face, undermining my efforts as a mother. "I'm doing the best I can," I snapped, unable to contain my frustration. Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Clearly, your best isn't good enough. Maybe if you had a real job and some structure in your life." I felt a surge of anger. "This is my house, Elaine. You're a guest here. Don't forget that." Her laugh was cold and dismissive. "Oh dear. Ryan never mentioned how delusional you are. This is his house too, and as his mother, I've every right to be here." The following day, I reached my breaking point. I found Elaine in Lucas's room, going through his drawers. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. "I'm just organizing. This room is a mess," she replied, not even bothering to look at me. "That's it! I want you out of my house now!" I exclaimed, feeling a mix of fury and desperation. Elaine turned to face me, her expression one of mock surprise. "Your house? Oh, sweetie, you're just the wife. This is Ryan's house too, and he wants us here." I stormed out of the room, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Ryan's betrayal, Elaine's intrusiveness, the way they dismissed my feelings, it was all too much. I was tired of being pushed around, tired of having my home invaded by people who had no respect for me. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. I was going to take back control of my life, my home, and my son's future. Ryan and his parents had crossed a line, and it was time for them to learn that I wasn't going to be their doormat any longer. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready. A few days later, Ryan dropped a bombshell during an already tense dinner. "My parents need to stay with us longer. Their house is undergoing renovations," he said, nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I felt my blood boil. "Longer?" "Ryan, we never discussed them staying in the first place," he shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "It's just for a few more weeks. What's the big deal?" "The big deal? The big deal is that your mother treats me like an intruder in my own home." I snapped, my frustration reaching its peak. Elaine, overhearing our conversation, chimed in with her usual condescending tone. "Amelia, you're overreacting. We're family. You should be more accommodating." That night, sleep eluded me. Their words echoed in my mind, fueling a growing resolve. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I called my brother, Alex, who had always been my confidant. "They're taking over my life, Alex. I can't take it anymore," I confessed, choking back tears. Alex's voice was firm and supportive. "Amelia, you need to stand up for yourself. Don't let them bully you. It's your house, your rules." His words were the push I needed. I decided to confront Ryan, but this time I would be prepared. I gathered evidence of Elaine's overbearing behavior, the rearranged kitchen, the disrupted routines, her constant belittling comments. Confrontation day arrived. I waited until Elaine and Ryan were in the living room. "We need to talk, now," I announced, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Ryan looked up, surprised by my tone. "What's this about, Amelia?" "It's about your parents, Ryan. Their constant interference, their disrespect for my boundaries. It ends today," I declared, holding up my list of grievances. Elaine scoffed. "This is ridiculous. We're just trying to help." "Help? By undermining me at every turn? By treating me like I don't matter in my own home?" I countered, my anger palpable. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Amelia, they're my parents. We can't just kick them out." "No, Ryan. They're guests in my home, and they've overstayed their welcome. Either they leave, or I do." With Lucas, I ultimatumed, my resolve unwavering. The room fell silent, the gravity of my words hanging in the air. I saw the flicker of realization in Ryan's eyes, but it was Elaine who spoke first. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, her facade slipping. "Watch me," I retorted, my voice laced with determination. That night, Ryan's parents packed their bags. As they left, Elaine shot me a venomous look. "You'll regret this, Amelia." But as the door closed behind them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the first step in reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days following Elaine and her husband's departure were eerily quiet. Ryan's demeanor had shifted to one of cold detachment, his interactions with me minimal and strained. I found solace in the peace of my reclaimed home and the joyous laughter of Lucas. One evening, as Lucas played with his toys, Ryan announced, "I've got to go on a business trip. I'll be gone for a few weeks." His tone was indifferent, as if our strained relationship had taken a backseat to his career. "Fine," I replied curtly, barely concealing my relief at the prospect of his absence. After Ryan left, the house felt different, liberating even. I started to revert the changes Elaine had imposed, each alteration feeling like a small victory. But the true turning point came when I stumbled upon a series of emails on Ryan's laptop, which he'd carelessly left open. They detailed an affair, an ongoing betrayal that cut deeper than any of his mother's snide remarks. Anger, hurt, and a sense of betrayal churned within me. I decided it was time for Ryan to face the consequences of his actions. I began to meticulously plan my next moves, each step calculated to ensure that Ryan and his family paid for their deceit and manipulation. The first step was to secure my financial and legal standing. I contacted a lawyer, explained my situation, and started the proceedings for what was now an inevitable divorce. Next, I turned my attention to the house, the symbol of my grandparents' legacy and my independence. I reached out to a real estate agent. "I want to sell the house, quickly and quietly," I told her. She was taken aback but sensed the urgency in my voice. "Are you sure about this, Amelia? This is a big decision," she cautioned. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied with a resolve born of betrayal and a newfound strength. The house went on the market, and within days, offers began to roll in. The thought of Ryan returning to find his precious control stripped away brought a bitter satisfaction. In the midst of this, I reconnected with my family, drawing strength from their support. My parents were appalled by Ryan's behavior and rallied around me and Lucas. "We're here for you, no matter what," my father assured me. As I watched Lucas play, innocent and unaffected by the turmoil, I made a silent vow to protect his happiness at all costs. Ryan's return loomed on the horizon, but I was no longer the woman he had left behind. I was ready to confront him, armed with the truth and a plan to reclaim my life. The day Ryan returned was marked with a tension that hung thick in the air. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, envisioning every possible outcome, yet my heart raced as I heard his key turn in the lock. "Amelia, I'm home," Ryan called out, his voice echoing through the now unfamiliar space. I emerged from the kitchen, my posture rigid. "Welcome back, Ryan. We need to talk." He glanced around, noticing the changes I had made. "What's going on? The house looks different." I didn't flinch. "I sold the house, Ryan. It's no longer ours." His face contorted with disbelief. "You did what? You can't just sell our house without telling me." "It's my house, Ryan, and after what I discovered, I don't think you have a say in it anymore," I said, my voice steady but laced with a simmering anger. He scoffed, trying to regain his composure. "What are you talking about?" "The affair, Ryan. I know everything," I revealed, watching as his facade crumbled. His attempt at denial was weak and short-lived. "Amelia, it's not what you think." "I think it's exactly what it looks like. You betrayed me, our family," I retorted, the hurt evident in my tone. Ryan's expression shifted from shock to anger. "You're overreacting. We can work through this." "There's no we anymore, Ryan. I've filed for divorce," I declared, handing him the papers. The ensuing conversation was a blur of accusations and denials, but I stood my ground. The man I had married was gone, replaced by a stranger fueled by selfish desires. As he stormed out, vowing to fight the divorce, I felt a sense of liberation mixed with apprehension. I had taken the first step towards a new life. But the battle was far from over. In the following weeks, the reality of our situation became public. Ryan's parents, once so imposing and confident, were now caught in the crossfire of their son's indiscretions. Their attempts to contact me were met with silence. I had severed all ties, focusing solely on Lucas and the finalization of the divorce. The day of the court hearing arrived. Ryan looked defeated, the weight of his actions finally dawning on him. As the judge granted the divorce and custody of Lucas to me, I felt a sense of justice. Ryan's plea for reconciliation after the hearing fell on deaf ears. "You made your choice, Ryan. Now live with it," I said, turning away from him for the last time. The news of our divorce and Ryan's affair spread, affecting his reputation and relationships. His parents, once so proud and judgmental, were now shunned by those who had once respected them. As I walked out of the courthouse, holding Lucas's hand, I realized that this was not just an end, but a new beginning. A fresh start for me and my son, free from deceit and manipulation. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. Life after the divorce felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the light. I had regained control, not just of the house, which was now sold, but of my life. Lucas, blissfully unaware of the adult complexities, thrived in the love and stability I provided. My days were busy but fulfilling, with my focus now on rebuilding our lives and managing the coffee shop, which had become my sanctuary. However, the shadow of Ryan and his parents lingered. One day, as I was closing the shop, Ryan appeared, looking disheveled and desperate, a stark contrast to the composed man I had once known. "Amelia, please, I need to talk to you," he pleaded, his eyes searching mine for a hint of the compassion that once existed. I hesitated, the sight of him stirring a mix of emotions. "What do you want, Ryan?" "It's about the alimony and child support," he began, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "I can't afford it. My job, I lost it because of the scandal, and my parents, they're broke too." His words were like a cold splash of reality. "That's not my problem, Ryan. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." "But Amelia, I have nothing left. I'm begging you, for old time's sake." His voice broke, revealing the depth of his despair. I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of his betrayal. "Old time's sake? Those times are gone, Ryan. You should have thought about the consequences before you cheated and lied." I turned to leave, but his next words stopped me in my tracks. "I'm sorry, Amelia. Truly I am. I was a fool, and I ruined everything. Please, help me." For a moment, I saw the man I had once loved, vulnerable and regretful. But the pain he had caused was too deep, the betrayal too raw. "I'm sorry, Ryan, but I can't help you. You need to figure this out on your own," I said firmly, closing the chapter of our shared past for good. As I walked away, leaving Ryan standing alone, I felt a sense of closure. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartache, but it had led me to a place of strength and independence. Life moved on. Lucas grew, his laughter and curiosity filling our home with joy. The coffee shop flourished, becoming a hub of warmth and community. And as for me, I found contentment in the simple pleasures: the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of Lucas's giggles, and the support of friends and family. Ryan and his parents became distant memories, their legacy a cautionary tale of the consequences of betrayal and selfishness. My journey had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I locked the shop that evening, I looked up at the sky, its hues of orange and pink signaling the end of another day. I smiled, holding Lucas's hand tightly. Our future was uncertain, but it was bright. We were moving forward, one step at a time, into a new chapter of our lives.